One Piece Chapter 1018 is out, and this time we get a lot more information about Who's Who versus Jinbei. The cover story this week is Page 1 and Ulti, and we have Page 1 reading a book about dinosaurs while Ulti kind of cuddles him, and they have a bunch of dinosaur plushies in the background. First thing I want to point out is that the dinosaur plushies actually represent the rest of the Beast Pirates. If you look at it, you can see Who's Who, Black Maria, you see Queen, King, you see Kaido up top, you see Sasaki on the other side, you see Jack the Drought. So you see all of the commanders of the Beast Pirates, and then you see the Toby Robo of the Beast Pirates as well, and even Kaido up there. And I thought that was really cool. But we also just get to see Page 1 and Ulti hanging out. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I really love Ulti, and I like the Ulti Page 1 dynamic. So this cover story was really cool to me. Personally, I would love to see like an Ulti and Page 1 side story, or maybe some cover stories that just pertain to those two. Maybe how they ended up on the Beast Pirates, maybe what they were doing beforehand, something like that. That would be really cool to see. The first half of the chapter really deals with the aftermath of Tama giving her order. So we're seeing a lot of the headliners, the gifters that have switched sides, and we're seeing what they're doing basically. And they're just taking on more Beast Pirates. You have all the confusion, all the chaos going through, and you just see basically more fighting, but it's basically just between the Beast Pirates if you look at it. You have the headliners and they're fighting the pleasures, the waiters, basically anyone going after the Alliance. Now, as all that fighting is taking place, we see that Speed's come through, and she's pretty much picking up Nami, Usopp, and Tama, and they're riding away. What I'm expecting to happen is kind of what happened when Speed was taking Tama away and she ran to Kaido, where someone is basically going to stop them as they're escaping. Because if you notice, one of the Beast Pirates mentions that if they kill Tama, they may be able to stop her power. And one of the big things about this is that Tama is currently switching the sides and getting a large number of Beast Pirates on the Alliance side. Even CP0 notices that the outcome is changing drastically to where it's almost even between the amount of numbers on each side. I also feel like that's another indicator that something bad might happen to Tama. And at this point, everyone knows Tama's power is the one that's causing this drastic change. You have people, even the fodder, are looking at Tama like, okay, so her power did it, we have to stop her. And there's no way Kaido's not going to know that if he ends up anywhere near this area. Now, I think he's going to be occupied with Yamato, so he might not be back to the life floor, but someone will, and someone's going to try and stop Tama. It also looks like Zeus and Nami have made up, and Nami pretty much gives him the option to be her partner instead of a servant, which if you think back to Whole Cake Island, Zeus made the offer to kind of be her servant, and Sanji got super jealous and things like that. But we have them being partners now, so it looks like the conclusion to the Zeus and Nami kind of mini arc is happening here. I still wonder if Big Mom is going to notice that Zeus is alive, if at some point in time Nami is going to fight with Zeus and Big Mom's going to mention something about that, but it seems like this might be the end and Zeus might be leaving with Nami here. And I don't have a problem with Nami getting a power-up. I just want to know how it's going to work with Big Mom. Because I have the feeling that if it's Big Mom's soul, if it's a part of her, I feel like she should know where it's going to be at all times. I feel like there should be a sense of self whenever she encounters Nami, and that should give her a very clear indication that part of her soul is with Nami now. As mentioned before, CP0 is still keeping an eye on the numbers, and they're noticing that everything is moving a lot more smoothly for the white side, basically the Alliance. Things are getting a lot closer. However, they remark that the end of the fight isn't really consequential to them. They don't really care what happens at the end of the fight. They are actually here to make sure that someone dies, and it seems like that someone is Who's Who. Apparently, the information that Who's Who has is so important that it might be necessary to make sure that he does not make it out of Wano. Now, they kind of covered up by mentioning that it's old news, so people might not really care or it might not be as detrimental to the government as it was once before. But the fact that they're here and the fact that Who's Who is giving out some crucial information at the end of the chapter makes me think that there's more to this and more to what they want to do with Who's Who than what they're kind of letting on here. I also want to know why they classify him as a rogue, because Jinbei mentioned that, and they even say it here that he's a rogue CP9 agent. But the thing about that is, it seems like the rogue part is a step away from the escapee part. Like, basically they gave him that rogue title when he lost the fruit. So is there something more about that altercation that we don't know that made him seem a bit more untrustworthy than just the fact that he got beaten by Shanks? Because we've even seen with Rob Lucci that when he was beaten by Luffy, although there were some hardships in the middle, he ended up on CP0. So why would they take Who's Who, who's supposed to be on Lucci's level, and classify him as a rogue agent and arrest him if he got beaten by Shanks? And maybe Shanks wasn't that strong or prominent back then, especially not as he is now, but I think that's still a little bit more than to just say, okay, you got beat by somebody, we're arresting you now. I feel like there's a little bit extra that happened there, mainly with Shanks, that we kind of have to explore before we really understand that entire altercation. And even going further into the chapter, Who's Who mentions that his real grudge lies with Shanks, because Shanks is the one that stole the fruit. It just basically passes on to Luffy because Luffy is the one who ate it and kind of came to prominence with it. Now this also confirms that Shanks and his crew were in fact the ones that stole the fruit. I know there was some kind of debate here and there about whether, the government had it, someone interact with them, and then whoever that was got beaten by Shanks. But no, there's a direct correlation between the government having the fruit and then Shanks going and stealing it. And that is specifically what Who's Who has a grudge against. The fight gets more intense as Who's Who keeps throwing out Rokushiki moves, and they're starting to damage Jinbei even when he's got armament up. One thing I want to point out is that he actually uses Iron Body with other moves, which is something that beforehand, Jabra stated that only he could do. He was the only Rokushiki master that could use Iron Body and other techniques within Iron Body, basically moving with Iron Body. But we see here that Who's Who uses that and then immediately charges in. So I think that is, one, really cool, but two, also states that he was there before Jabra. So like maybe he wasn't introduced into the other members of CP9, or maybe Jabra wasn't part of CP9 at the time. Whatever that may be, those two didn't interact because Jabra believes that he's the only one who can do that. Overall, it seems like Who's Who's Rokushiki techniques are necessarily well above and beyond Lucci's, but it looks like they have more power because even like his Fang pistols, they cut through the ground, they cut through armament, they tear through a lot of stuff cleanly. And I don't really see Lucci doing anything like that. The most he has is his launching finger pistol, which it still does piercing damage, but nowhere near the application of what Who's Who's been doing. As the battle goes on, the tide tends to shift in Jinbei's favor, and this becomes even more so once Who's Who brings up the sun god Nika. Now this isn't the first time the sun god has been mentioned in One Piece. If we look back at the Skypiea arc, there are some brief mentions of it there, but here we get a lot more detail for it. Basically, this god would bring you laughter and end your suffering, and this is what Who's Who looked towards when he was arrested and imprisoned. Now, the person who told Who's Who about this ended up vanishing shortly after they started talking about it, and Who's Who, in fear of he was going to be next up to vanish, escaped. Now, Who's Who makes a correlation between the Sun God and the Sun Pirates, and he also makes a correlation between the fact that the Sun God was revered by ancient slaves and the Sun Pirates were made up of slaves. So basically he's making the comparisons between the two and saying that there's some kind of relation that Jinbei might know of. And so while he's asking Jinbei this, it seems almost as if this hits a nerve because Jinbei goes into somewhat of this tranquil fury state where he's starting to get angrier, and Who's Who even mentions like, why are you angry all of a sudden? What happened here? All these pieces together indicate that there is more behind the sun god Nika than just some myth or rumor. Something that either Jinbei knows, Jinbei has an idea of, or something that maybe Jinbei doesn't necessarily know but has heard of. It's also not a coincidence that CP0 currently wants to make sure that Who's Who dies because he has some special information. Now, could this all tie together with the Gum Gum fruit, with the interaction between Shanks? I'm not entirely sure. These could be two separate things. But the point is that Who's Who has a lot of valuable information that CP0 doesn't want to get out, which means there has to be some credence, there has to be some kind of connection to Void Century, or at least history that they don't want the world to know about. With each word Who's Who seems to say, it looks like Jinbei's armament just gets a boost, because at some point Who's Who's moves become only somewhat effective to the point where even he's hurting himself trying to attack Jinbei. So Jinbei's armament is boosting way up, and Who's Who's is apparently not up to snuff anymore, which is interesting because it only happens through the course of this short fight where at the beginning Who's Who was dominating, and now like even he's using finger pistol with Haki and he's breaking his fingers trying to do that. The chapter ends with Jinbei revving up a ultimate technique of Goijin karate, and he seemingly knocks out Who's Who. Now, I don't think Who's Who's done here. I don't think the fight's quite over, but Jinbei makes a comment that if he's going to be looking into history like that, he shouldn't just do it based off a rumor. He needs to have information. So what I get from that is that there is more to this that Jinbei knows, and that people kind of just meddling in it isn't really respecting it. And the reason I don't think Who's Who is down quite yet is just because I feel like there's a few more pieces that we need from the information that he has to tie things together. I think there's like probably 1 or 2 more exposition spots that we could get from him before he's kind of KO'd, or I guess written out of story for the time being, that could help us piece things together as to why CP0 is trying to silence him. Overall, great chapter. Love seeing more of the Jinbei versus Who's Who fight. This is one of the ones that I was super hyped for, so I'm glad to see it still going. And I'm wondering if we're going to get like 1 more chapter of Who's Who versus Jinbei, or maybe just like the culmination of Who's Who versus Jinbei in the next chapter. We'll see. And of course, I want to get back to Kaido versus Yamato. But thank you for watching. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. There will be a poll in the description below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.